Welcome to the Philly Crime Podcast, and we're joining forces with Mob Talk Sitdown again this week. My guest again this week is retired crime scene unit investigator, one of the top crime scene unit experts in our area, John Taggart. John, thanks for coming on the show.
Thanks for having me again, Dave.
All right, we're fortunate that John processed multiple crime scenes over his career, over several thousand homicide scenes, but he did also process at least 6 mob hits and or homicides, all of which that are unsolved. So we thought we'd bring John on the show. He's been with us the last 3 weeks. This is the 4th round with him. And we're going to talk today about the murder of Gino Marconi, which happened in April 1999. And the reason we're talking about it is, again, it's unsolved. Nobody's ever been charged in the case. There hasn't been a lot of progress on it. It occurred on South 20th Street, right in the heart of South Philadelphia. I believe that's right on the edge of Girard Estates right there in that area. But this one was a lot different than other mob hits. It kind of took place from a distance away, and it involved the use of a rifle. So, John, let's get right into it. The crime scene, walk me through, when you get there, you're looking at 2 crime scenes, really, where he gets shot in front of his house, and the scene across the street where there are multiple vehicles torched. Talk to us.
Yeah, so the scene has already been disturbed. Fire department, God, you love them to death, but they can ruin a crime scene. So the fire department was called first to put out the fire, and I know there was nobody there. That there was 2 victims that were shot. I don't remember if they were declared dead right away or again they lived a little. I know the female, she ended up living.
I've actually met her in the years since that's happened. She was gravely wounded. I'm not sure if the bullets passed through Marconi and hit her, or there were multiple shots fired and she was hit. She was gravely injured. She's lucky to be alive. She knows that. I know she's very thankful for that. I also know that she's not happy that no one's ever been charged in this case.
Yeah, she was. I remember she was listed in really critical condition when we first got there. So we had to wait for the car, the minivan to cool down. It was probably, I'm sure it was still smoking when we got there.
And you can see that in the picture right there. It was torched. I mean, this thing's burned badly, correct?
Yeah, it was burned. And I remember a tree or a pole or something there got burned up too, and maybe a couple of cars also. But we were an interesting item about this case. We were told that car was parked at the corner because they couldn't get a parking spot. So every time somebody pulled out, it would move up. And I remember being told that this happened over a couple of days until they got right in front of the house.
Yeah. And in fact, we heard after this killing happened and everybody was still working on it, that it was almost like a little hopscotch thing with the car. As you said, starts out at the end of the block, moves up a couple spots the next day, couple spots the next day, and then a couple spots to this spot, which is right across the street from Mr. Marconi's home on South 20th Street, where the shooting occurs. And John, when you arrive on the scene, you're processing where the victims fell, I'm assuming, and then processing the van. And talk to me about the proximity of the 2 and where the shooting or the shots came from.
The shots came from, we were told, not the sunroof that you see broken off. I think that just burned out and fell into the front driver compartment. Mm-hmm. But there was a cutout, almost like a turret up top, like homemade, and they poked their head out there, almost like a tank, mm-hmm. and fired the rifle from there across the street. 20th Street's probably 34, 36 feet wide. So it's a nice little distance to get 2 people. Don't remember how many casings we got. I know it was only a 22. We did get some casings. And like I said, while we were out there, I remember finding the rifle. The gun they left the gun in the car. It's one of the few times on any of these jobs where you get they just don't care. They left the weapon.
Yeah. All right. Well, tell me, when you slide open the door of the vehicle of that van right there, you're talking about in the seats in the back, right behind the drivers and passenger seat in the front.
It'd be in the second row, and it was on the floor between two seats.
What's your reaction when you see there's a rifle sitting right there and you know this took place from a distance away?
Well, you're pretty happy because, like I said, you never on any of these jobs, you never get the weapon. So maybe now that weapon can be traced through the serial number. Now every gun we collect, ATF, we send a report to ATF, and they actually do a background check on the gun, and they can tell you when it was made and who bought it and who sold it. So even that, I just remember that, like that probably wasn't done then. That rifle's probably still sitting in firearms identification unit at our building or over in City Hall.
Yeah. What condition was that gun in, given the fire that took place there?
I'm sorry, repeat that.
What condition was the rifle in, given what happened with the fire in the van?
It was all burned up, but still, the barrel the markings would still be, you'd be able to identify through the rifle markings in the gun. It's not hot enough to melt the gun, but any wood on it was burnt. But the metals, that fire didn't get hot enough to melt that weapon.
Yeah. Well, what about to affect fingerprints in a case like this? Will setting it on fire like that do away with any chance for fingerprints?
Yeah, because I mean, the chances of getting fingerprint would have been on the stock, or any of the wood parts on it. Yeah, once it was set on fire, that was like they just didn't care. They knew you weren't going to be able to get anything, even DNA. If we had swabbed at the time, which I don't believe we were, would have been burned off, and it would have been in so much.
Yeah. From what you could tell, to get a fire reminiscent of that photo of the van all burned up like that, obviously this looks like it was pretty well planned out. I know you're not into motives and being a detective, but I know you're kind of a junior detective in your mind all the time you're on a crime scene, and you do have theories, John. I know that because I've been on crime scenes with you. But what are you thinking when you see a van? You see the guy shot from far away. They move it down the block to get right in front, and then they torch the van. What does that tell you right off the bat? It's planned, right? Very intricately planned.
Yes. Yeah, there was a lot. And then I know that night out there we had heard that the car had started at the end of the block and then moved up, and that was something different. Mm-hmm. And then finding a weapon, that was because you never find a weapon, but I guess because they used a rifle, they weren't going to carry it from the scene. I don't know if they got picked up. I don't know.
Yeah, they call that a trail car in mob hits. Sometimes there's a blocking car will block the end of the block so nobody can go down the block when something's going to occur. Then there's a trail car that usually picks up the shooters if they're on foot right there. In this case, they were in a van. They probably got out of the van, set the van on fire, either ran from the scene or got into another vehicle. And I know from some of the news articles and from my news gathering back in the day there were not a lot of people. People heard the shots and came out of the house, and they found Gino Marconi lying right outside his home. The young lady involved who was also shot was, I believe, near the front doorstep or on the front steps or right close to the front door area. He was, I think, a little bit further out in the street kind of situation. So these guys were patient and obviously very determined to carry out this hit. If they waited, moved the car down the block, and they didn't approach him, they shot him from across the street.
Yeah, there was a lot of thought into this one, and a lot of time, and like you said, patience. How no one didn't notice that car moving up. Like that.
Prior to it, they did tell police about that afterward. Yes.
Yeah, I know they did, but you think you might tell somebody? People don't like to get involved in things where they think it's meaningless, but something like that, somebody had to see something. Somebody getting in that car, because I'm sure they didn't stay in that van for 2 or 3 days and keep moving up. I'm sure they came back every once in a while and saw that parking spot and moved up.
Yeah. So they were waiting to get in a specific spot, probably the best shot possible would come from a location like that right in front of the house. So they were waiting to move up to get the best shot possible. Any doubt in your mind about that?
No doubt in my mind. No doubt in my mind. And when you first get there too, because a woman's involved, you're not so sure it's not over her.
Right.
You know, why is she shot? That's not their MO.
No, in fact, that is not their MO. And I think sometimes there are situations. There was a shooting at the Warfield Diner that was caught on video by the FBI from a pole camera or a camera mounted across the street, in which there was a woman present when they went in and shot an individual. Whole team of guys went inside there and opened fire, and there was a woman in there. And I know a couple of people who were involved in that case were upset by the fact that they didn't know she was going to be there when they went in there to kill somebody. But that's not the way they usually deal with things. But that also tells me that whoever was behind the rifle there was popping off quite a few shots here to make sure the job got done. And potentially some of those shots either went through Mr. Marconi into the young lady and or hit the young lady and miss him.
Yeah. And there's a little bit of a distance too.
Yeah.
I'm sure that didn't help. You know, they're usually right up on top of you when they off you. And there was a little bit of a distance, and I'm sure it wasn't very comfortable sticking your head out that makeshift roof.
Yeah.
You know, to fire.
Yeah, and talk about planning. If they in fact cut a hole in the roof and they had this makeshift turret up there kind of deal, that van had to be worked on somewhere before they brought it to the scene and used it, correct?
Yeah, and looking back, I kind of remember that it was painted, and I think they had found out where the car was painted. So I know that job we thought might come in because they got a little close on where that van was worked on. I think actually around the corner somewhere.
Yeah, it was right nearby from what I remember. Yeah.
And I think they painted it. It was a different color. I mean, you can't tell now because it was all burned off, but
yeah. And it was stolen, if I remember correctly.
Yeah. Don't remember that. I'm sure. I mean, I mean, they're not gonna do a murder like this and it's registered to somebody they know. Yeah. And they can try to take off the VIN number, the vehicle identification number, but it's on a car. I think anywhere from 12 to 17 spots throughout the car. So
yeah,
even if you think you take the one off the windshield and there's one on the seatbelt, there's other ones that are secretly hidden.
Yeah. From what you remember, anything valuable recovered off that van in terms of fingerprints or anything like that? I'm assuming anything like hairs and things like that. Any kind of evidence would have been burned up in that fire.
The weapon was the big thing, and then we found shell casings. That's why I know it was a 22. We also found some projectiles that had hit the wall of the house and bounced back onto the street. I remember finding like 3 or 4 of them. Don't remember how many shots were fired, and I want to say maybe there was 4 or 5 outside the car, and then the car would have been taken again to McAllister and Whitaker. I don't remember doing it. Somebody else might have done it, and they would have sifted the car out. I'm sure they would have found casings inside the car.
Yeah. Okay. So it sounds to me like you were pretty hopeful for homicide detectives on this about potentially solving this because you had the gun, the shell casings, the van, some good material evidence to lead investigators to do a lot of good legwork.
Early on, too. I mean, usually it's developed over a course of time. I remember that night specifically that they thought they knew where the car was painted. And then again, we had the gun. And it's funny how things have changed so much that we didn't do that ATF tracking, that gun tracking. So I'd like to see that done on the weapon.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, for folks who don't know what that is, it's alcohol, tobacco, and firearms and explosives. That's a federal agency. They routinely now do gun lookups for the police department. They actually had a pilot program where they did, I believe, bullets and shell casings they could actually run in addition to the weapon. And they will routinely run that up against a national database, which, as John told them, will tell you when the gun was made, where it was made, what gun shop it went to, where it was purchased, if it was transferred or sold again after that. All those things would come in a report from the ATF, and they're pretty damn good at those tracking situations when they have a decent weapon or evidence to work with.
Yeah, every gun gets tracked. Our evidence will not accept the gun without that ATF form. It's almost, it's like the property receipt. You can't turn it in without that form. And then they get back to you pretty fast. They send you a letter back and it has all the information on it.
Yeah. Well, it's interesting. We talked about the car moving down the block and things like that. Let me tell you a little bit about, from investigating this and doing stories on it, there was all kinds of supposition about what the motive might be here. Mr. Marconi was generally classified by the FBI and Philadelphia organized crime investigators as a low-level associate in Joey Merlino's crime family at the time, allegedly involved in some drug activity, possibly big sales of marijuana, things like that. There was some speculation maybe he wasn't paying street tax to the mob on the stuff he was selling. Things like that were going on. In terms of who did it, there were a lot of rumors at the time. There's been reports since then that a crew from Boston, who were also associated with the Merlino crime family at the time, may have come down here and done that murder, which might explain why they don't know the neighborhood and the parking situation in South Philly, and they had to move the car down the block to get the parking spot they wanted. Because everybody who knows anything about Philadelphia knows in South Philly, parking spots are premium. People put cones in them, lawn chairs in them, all kinds of objects in them to save their parking spot. And on 20th Street there in South Philly, right near Girard Estates, when I tell you parking's tight there, it's tight. So if you're from out of town and you don't know that, you got to keep moving that van up the block till you get in the position you want to get in to use that rifle. So that might explain a little bit the theory that it was a crew from Boston who carried it out. I believe some names also got thrown around by the FBI and local police, but again, nobody ever charged. Nobody's been brought in before a bar of justice to face the music on this kind of thing. And John, we talked about this in the other 3 episodes. That's super frustrating to guys like you, especially here where you had some decent evidence to work with on a mob hit.
Yeah, it is, because you do a lot of work on these jobs and they go nowhere. And it seems like the next day, I remember this is one I called up a lot about, because I knew they kind of thought where that van got painted. It got painted a different color, and it was around the corner. So you think they had something to work with there, and the gun, the gun that we found. But again, you do these jobs and you get, your bosses are up your butt about turning in stuff, and they want reports, and then people come in and take it, and you never hear about it again.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. And again, I think this is one of about 6 mob murders and mob hits that the FBI and Philadelphia police have worked on, even up until recently, trying to prepare a possible racketeering case that would include these murders. But at this point, that has not happened. I don't believe there's anything active going on these. They'll tell you that domestic cases are always open, because homicide is one charge that never goes away. You could have a murder from 50 years ago, and if you have evidence and proof and you can make an arrest, that person can still be charged with murder even 50 years ago. So, and those things do happen. People come forward after years and talk about a crime, maybe lead police to evidence and things like that. And John, I'm sure you've worked on cases where someone came forward years later, gave you evidence that might lead to an arrest.
I've worked on two that actually went to court before I was even born. One was a cop killing, and I forget the other one, but I think the cop killing happened 10 years before I was born.
Yeah.
But he lived for a little while, and then he died, and we rearrested. The bad guy had done 12 years for an ag assault. And then the cop dies, and the ME ruled it a murder from being shot 60 years earlier.
Mm-hmm.
So,
and you guys put together all the evidence and went to court with it and ended up having a case.
The jury didn't think so. No, it didn't. That one didn't work out too good.
Yeah. Okay. But you can bring a case to court in a situation.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah. A lot of the those juvenile lifers where they come back and gotten new sentencing hearings. Mm-hmm. That was the other one I worked on. Police officer was killed, and the government said you can't sentence a juvenile to life without parole. So they bring them back into court and they have a new sentencing hearing. And, my job was to go to evidence and look for all the evidence after 40 or 50 years and bring it back into court. But then they just give them, I think 2 of them, it was like time served. The kid, they were already in jail for like 35 years and they let them go.
Yeah. All right. That's it for the Gino Marconi hit. John, we're going to tease a little something here, which we like to do in the TV business. The next episode, we're going to talk about a shooting on the Schuylkill Expressway, an attempted assassination of mob boss John Stanfa back in the day in the early 90s, allegedly carried out by the Merlino crew. Nobody's ever been charged. Actually, some people have been charged. Nobody's ever been found guilty in that case or anything like that. But you had a unique position in that case. You weren't with the crime scene. You were a police officer. Don't give it all away here, but you had kind of an inside look at John Stanfa and his family after his son got shot in that expressway shooting.
Yeah, I worked in the 18th district, and my car, my car sector was part of the University of Pennsylvania, and I got sent to the University of Pennsylvania to sit on John Stanfa's son, who had been shot in I believe it was the left side of the head, and we thought he was going to die. And I sat and guarded him for my whole tour one day.
Okay, and that was a drive-by shooting on the Schuylkill Expressway from a van with holes cut in the side where the guns were put out the window, out through those holes, and fired on John Stanfa's car. There's some incredible pictures of what happened to that vehicle and what happened afterward. And I mean, that was one of the probably the most notoriety I've ever seen to a mob hit in the last 30 years, because it happened on the Schuylkill Expressway in the middle of rush hour, I believe, in the morning. And it turned into a real circus out near John Stanfa's place after his son was taken to the hospital. But we're going to get into that in the next episode. John's going to give us kind of an inside look at that from his vantage point at the time. And greatly appreciate you coming on the show again this week, John, in the last 3 weeks talking to us about all this. I know some of it's hard to remember because it's years ago, but appreciate you giving it a shot.
Thanks, man.
Okay, John, thanks again. That's Philly Prime for this week, and we'll see you next time. Stay tuned. You can get this on Philly Prime Podcast and on mobtalksitdown.com on our YouTube channel. You can watch all of these episodes. You can go back and watch them if you haven't seen the first 3. Take a look, and I'm sure you'll be entertained by what John Taggart had to say. Thanks again for joining us. We'll see you next time.